everyone, and good whatever moment of the day you are enjoying on your time zones. I was actually so much looking forward to kicking off day 4 of our January series, where we have a space especially dedicated for HR. We spend so much time talking about how HR can show up for everybody in the organization. It was high time we created a space where we show up for ourselves. We will be spending the next hour or so discussing about HR resilience blueprint, more especially about building mental and emotional strength. And I will continue to welcome everybody who uh, joins us. I see comments coming in, which is great. That means that at least technology works as it is supposed to work. My name is Minora Jacques. I will be your co-host for the first conversation of today. We have Jessa taking care of us backstage, and I will ask Jessa to help me fill the screen with just pure human awesomeness. And while they just get used to their faces next to each other, I will encourage everybody in the audience, first and foremost, do let us know where you're listening in or where you're watching us. That is our way of traveling around the world, always through you. And at the same time, do consider the comment space your own conversation stage. And whatever it is that we're discussing with the panelists, leave your contributions, leave your ideas, your opinions, your own stories. We are always learning so much from all the nuances that you hear, that we hear from different geographies, different organizations, and just different life experiences and journeys, really. So let's make most of our time here today. Just before this question starts popping up, the conversation is being recorded. So you can always go back and re-listen, or you can recommend it either from our LinkedIn space or from hackinghrlab.io, our platform. And let's dive in. What I will do, I will get the e-mic going counterclockwise. I'm doing things a little bit differently this year. That means, Sarah, you will go first. And the first question is quite easy. Please just kindly, shortly introduce yourselves and do share with us what is your take on resilience that you bring into our conversation today. Sarah, so good to see you. Welcome. I can't hear you. I see you unmuted, but I can't hear you. Let's see. Like I keep saying, I won't be impressed by technology until I can download ice cream. How are we, Sarah? Are we good to go? No, still no. John, shall we go agile, not fragile, and then we will circle back to Sarah? Welcome, good to see you. Finally, we share
Good
a
to see
panel.
you. Thank you. Great to see you. John Baldino, president of Humoriso, an HR consulting firm. Uh, I've been around a long time, so it's lovely to see everyone. I would say for me, resilience. It's a very interesting word because I think sometimes there's some cachet to it that I think individuals feel that they will never measure up to. And so for me, resilience is really meeting people where they are and celebrating the small victories and helping them to understand that there is resilience even found in the day to day rather than the larger milestones that some people may have in their life. So I really try to look for those small pieces and encourage people to lean into those as proof positive that they can be resilient.
How wonderful. Thank you. Carrie, so happy to see you on the screen.
Hey, Manola. Carrie Brown. I'm a transformation evangelist with Celonis. My lens on resilience is really, I think about it like a fuel tank. And you have a fuel tank inside you of resilience. And sometimes you've used up all your fuel and sometimes you haven't. And I also think that it relates both professionally and personally in a number of facets. So whether that's health or emotional or physical or business or family, I think our tolerance and our resilience varies in each of those spaces and places. And so it's great to talk about that today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Jaylee, good to see you.
Hi, good to see you. Jolly Cohen. I have the pleasure of leading HR for Radiology Partners, where we're really focused on transforming radiology and making sure we're improving clinical care. I would say resilience for me is taking the lesson and then applying it going forward. So we know life is not easy. This is not an easy space. So it's really taking the lessons, specifically lessons not only from failures. People always talk about take the lessons from a failure, but also successes and how to apply it going forward and building that fortitude. So for me, that's really the essence of resilience.
Hmm. Thank you. Michelle, good to have you with us in this conversation.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Strasburger. I'm the CEO of The Wellness Value, where we focus on transforming the world of work and making it a happier and healthier place. My lens on resilience comes very personal, where I struggled with burnout being in an HR executive seat during COVID, like many of you. And so you're not alone. But the lens I take from that is that resilience is very individualized. So what I needed to heal was very personal to me and different from what other people need to heal. And that's really the approach we take to work, is that it's a very individualized approach. So I think this panel is going to be great because we'll all bring that our own lens and our own individual perspective to resilience. So you can take pieces of that with you.
Thank you. Sarah, let's see. Let's give it a try.
Hello.
Welcome.
So that's what you get for trying to do things differently. But here we are. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm glad to be with you again. My name is Sarah. I am the founder of a consultancy called At the Start, and I'm also a former CHRO. And what I bring is some perspective on that intersection between strategy and culture, communications and people, and all of those things, the way that they work together, that little golden nugget in the middle is where I try to focus. When I think about resilience, I really echo a lot of what the panel has already said, especially around the individuality of resilience. And one of the things that I'm hoping we'll talk a bit about here is acceptance and the way that we can accept the things that we cannot change, and do the things that we can with what we have the ability to influence. And I think that's a really important thing to be thinking about when we're talking about resilience.
Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And already so many mental post-its already stored here, and we will move forward and pick them one by one. But I was listening to your first answers, and I kept hearing a conversation from 2 days ago. We were talking about mental health, and there was one particular question around how does mental health show up in the workplace? And I think it can be a great conversation to kickstart this panel as well. How does mental health show up in the workplace? How do emotions show up in the workplace? And what kind of environment do these create for us and around us? And I won't be calling any one of you to pioneer. We will consider this round as a test for the unmuting competition. So let's just see where inspiration strikes. Gary.
I'll jump in. I think that it's very personal. So to the individuality comment, we don't get to leave ourselves at home when we come to work. And frankly, the discussion of COVID came up a couple of times. We got a much more intimate connection with people. We're all in our homes right now than we might have had before when we were in an office space. So to me, the resilience challenge shows up in work, and the mental health challenge shows up in work, because all of the rest of us, whether or not we show it or don't show it, comes to work with us. And so to me, the mental resilience that we bring, or who we are, we used to put a mask on a lot more. And now I think we take a lot of those masks off, or can't have them because you're looking inside the homes and places that we are. So to me, that mental health and mental well-being has become more visible. And so the mask we might have put on and we'd left the noise and the chaos or the joy or the love, whatever those things were, good or bad, that we had at home, they might not necessarily show up as overtly in the workplace as they did in the past and then they do now. So to me, I think mental health really shows up much more plainly when you get to see how we are living day to day.
Michelle.
To piggyback on that or continue the conversation, I also want to say that it's not negotiable, right? Your emotions are what they are. And I think we have to be much more open to talking about mental health in the workplace because it's there. We can't ignore it. And it's something that there are studies going back to the 1950s where actually work affects our mental health. And so if we're just ignoring it, we're perpetuating a problem.
I'll jump in. I think we have a fascinating dilemma when it comes to emotions in the workplace, because there's a portion of messaging that's coming through loud and clear to those that are working with us to bring your authentic self to work. And the problem is your authentic self might be extraordinarily irritating to me. And so emotions may run high on either side. And we wind up, unfortunately, sitting with individuals almost trying to discern right and wrong in those emotional components of who we're bringing to work. And we're balancing that with, and I love Carrie's point, but to sort of expand on it, we still have the highest percentage of workplaces that are at least hybrid, if not fully on site. And so the hiding at home component isn't happening for the majority of positions. And so we really have not equipped, I think, leadership, management, and even HR to really help to walk through what emotional health should look like. It was never a course that I took in my field of study, even at the master's level. And so we have an expectation on individuals that we've really not helped to equip for success.
I'm so happy that you said that, John. And I think, when I was mentioning before about acceptance, about the things we can't change, there's also a side component to that, which is awareness. And so I think that we are, as HR professionals, as leaders, and organizations at large, we have to be willing, when we say to let people come in the door as their authentic selves, the things that come with that, which are the emotions, and for ourselves, working with other people, having the awareness of ourselves and of other people, and being able to discern the truth, the thing that is real and relevant at work, and what is a personality, et cetera. And you're right, the learning around that is so essential. When I think about this and the connection to resilience, so much of it starts here with our own selves and as HR people and our teams, of being able to understand ourselves and the way we're operating, and then extending that to our teams, extending that to our leadership, our organizations. And so, that scaling up is really essential, but it will absolutely fail if we're not equipped here to regulate our own emotions, to understand how emotions work in the workplace, and how to mitigate some of the touchy things that come up when people get together. It's just the nature of humanity.
This is a fascinating discussion, and Sarah and John, I think you guys touched on some key points, and I want to highlight one caveat that I assume people are aware of, but for those of us in the HR space, to make no assumptions. There's no assumptions happening. Is that when we say bring your authentic self to work, it is to bring that authentic self to help advance and move forward the workplace, the work that you're doing, and whatever it is that overall intended outcome is. So if your authentic self disrupts that workplace or disrupts the outcome of the work, it's not helping, it's counterbalancing what the intended outcome is. So, you have this, I want you to bring your full authentic self, but it is in the context of work and how to really advance and help and move the workplace forward. And I think, Sarah and John, you're spot on, is that awareness of that fine line of it is in that particular context and not in your social circles or in your familial circles, I think is key for people to remember when we have those discussions.
Mm. I picked up on how very, very early on, you all mentioned this in one way or another, that resilience is something deeply individual. Listening to what you just shared, I picked up on another layer. So I would really love to take a few moments and look at the HR resilience blueprint and talk a little bit about what and how much of it is organizational and what and how much of it is individual. And how should we go? Sarah, you're just below my box.
You got me this time. So I always start at the individual level as a professional because I can't be of service to my team and my business if I am not showing up the way that I need to. So understanding at an individual level what takes my energy, when I start to feel off kilter at work, different scenarios or circumstances that come up. So this takes a high level of awareness and reflection and looking at what is your intention and then what is the outcome. So it's a lot of work to understand yourself, and then to be able to balance that with others in the organization. That's where I feel the organizational magic happens, because if my energy is zapped by laying people off, which it is, but I have somebody on my team with maybe a little more toughness and resilience in that particular scenario, we can better support each other, and vice versa on a different issue. So that's the organizational perspective, is thinking about the balances that we have that help us advance the work, as we were talking about before. And I think that that's on the flip side of that, at the organizational level, there has to be the set standard and tone of what is expected, so that as an individual, I know that it's okay for me to take that time to reflect, to say, hey, this is something that really impacts my ability to do great work, and know that it's going to be okay because those two things are working together.
I'm going to jump on some of what you said around energy. I think energy is infectious. I think so, whether that's organizationally or individually, energy is infectious. If you are in a place where there's great, like we all know when we're in a place around a person or around a group that has great energy, it fills us and it's infectious. Similarly, when you're in a toxic environment or a non-positive energy space, it is equally draining. So in terms of your question, Manola, of where does it reside? I absolutely agree with Sarah that your own personal awareness of bringing a worthy self to the point of Julie's comment of, bringing somebody who is being a contributor and a multiplier and all of the things that bring your best self. But if you are surrounded in a space where you are the only one bringing that best self, it's really hard to maintain your resiliency. So I absolutely think that organizationally, the sustainability and the momentum around resilience is influenced heavily on each individual. You can find a great team within an organization that might not be great, and that's where there's a great leader who's acting as a buffer. But if you look at energy overall, yes, have the awareness to bring your best self as a leader, as an individual, as whichever role you might be playing. In particular in HR, you're looking at understanding the dynamics of the organization at large. And so I would say that in the role of HR is looking at what do the leaders bring, what kind of organization, what kind of energy are you creating and building that allows for people to try and bring their best selves and grow and nurture that goodness, versus they come in with a suit of armor on to try and retain that themselves so that it doesn't become something that is energy sucking before they head home to navigate through life.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a caveat to that though too, because I think energy can be confused with happiness, and having an expectation of being happy all the time, I don't think is realistic. And so organizations need to give space for people to say, time out. I'm having a bad day. I'm feeling stressed or I have a lack of energy because we've been going through this. Can we take a moment to breathe? Can we take a moment to bring in somebody else that can help out, to Sarah's point? I think though too, going back to resilience is individualized. Part of resilience is setting boundaries. And I think that that's up to the individual HR person, which is hard for me. So I'm going to assume that other HR people have the same challenge. Very hard to say no, but it's also up to the organization and other leaders to respect those boundaries and accept them and say, it's after 5, Michelle's with her family. This can wait till tomorrow, right? Or I'll email her, but I'll email it her now so I can get it off my plate, but I'll set the email to be received tomorrow when she comes into the office. So I'm not bothering her at night. I think that's really important. There's also, I think, a lot of behaviors that HR has to unlearn. Right? In my career as an HR professional, there were some kind of unwritten expectations that I've learned over time. Like, we have to be tough. Okay, we have to have that coat of armor, or we feel we have to, right? Nobody ever said it, but we just feel like we have to be tough and we have to be the stronger ones. And I think we have to start giving ourselves permission to say, it's okay to have a bad day. It's okay to not be so strong. It's okay to be upset because we're doing layoffs. And do a little bit of, what do we call it? Self-care, self-grace.
This is really good. Thanks for all the comments so far. I think I agree. I think at an individual basis, for sure, is what has been shared. The individual has to become aware of emotional, what emotional stability looks like for that person, as well as emotional triggers for that individual as well, because something may obviously in a work environment be more of a trigger for one person than for another. But I also would say from an organizational standpoint, there are cultural norms that organizations have. And so there are, to Michelle's point, unspoken pieces that really influence what is valued from an emotional responsiveness and emotional care perspective. There are plenty of organizations that are heads down, do your work, and get it done. And then there are those that have an affinity group for everything under the sun. And so you want to find where you can, thrive the best. But also, I think, again, I'm full circling, coming back to the individual. I think there are ways in which the organization can be considerate of the lack of education and training around coping mechanisms. We have a very high learning curve for individuals in the workplace right now who have, for whatever reasons, sort of missed out on psychological investment in coping mechanisms. And so while I may be clamoring for emotional support, the organization isn't really equipped to be at the level that some are asking, and really need to help individuals say, these are coping mechanisms that we can't handle for you, but we want to get you to a place where you can get the support you need to develop them for yourself, because that's going to be a life skill, even if the time comes that you leave our organization.
Charlie, would you like to add anything here?
So this is an interesting one, because I was listening to what Michelle was saying at the first part about how everything is really not everything, but a lot of this is on the individual. I think the organization has, and a lot of them do these days, and this is post-COVID, they provide tools, right, for you to self-service. And then the obligation is on the individual to leverage those tools. Where I think that there is a gap is in the role of the leader or the manager to check in on the person. So I have the tools, I'm able to service myself. The organization has provided that. And John, this is, I was digesting what you were saying, is a lot of times leaders are not prepared, and it may be, it's usually these things are not malicious. If you're in HR, 95% of the time things are not malicious. It's just, it's not intuitive for them. I either feel like I cannot ask because it's personal, I don't want to infringe, or I don't want them to think I'm trying to find out their business, what's happening. And then sometimes the people are like, they didn't even ask me how I was doing. I just lost a parent, or they don't know what's happening, but people are going through all of these personal moments. And I think it's hard to say if it's the individual or if it's the organization or even if it's the leader. I feel like everyone has a part to play. So from an organizational standpoint, I provide you the tools. Because an organization, especially when you have thousands and thousands of people, you cannot manage everyone's individual personality needs and what they're looking for. And then at the individual, I cannot expect my employer to solve my individual issues or help me navigate my whatever emotional challenges I'm having. But I can ask, do you have resources or tools available to help me navigate this? Because this is a messy space. And then on the leader piece, you have to teach people how to do this. This is not, usually if you're in HR, a lot of things, logic, common sense, and that EQ is intuitive, which is why many of us are in that space. But it is not. I sit here and can look all of you in the eye and say it is not intuitive for most. And so how do you train and educate people? And I don't like to use the word training because then it falls into this other black hole. But how do you provide the education people need to engage at appropriate levels, just so people know you care? And I think that's on the mental health piece, is people need to know the people that they're working for and with care about them. And I think that's potentially a gap after listening to everyone on that mental health piece and how the role of individuals and organizations.
So love this conversation, and we are very fast approaching the middle of our time together today. I feel that this is an entire series potentially in and of itself. But I would just like to add something. This is something that I have been doing with my own content, but also every single time I see an offering, whether that's a workshop or just an outline of a conversation, I always challenge how much of this is targeted at equipping the role and how much of this is helping the individual fulfilling that role to perform at their very best, at their most comfortable, at their most validating, and quite potentially at their most sustainable and most healing. Now, I'm so sorry. I'm still recovering from a bug. I know I sound like Donald Duck, so thank you for putting up with my voice. I will just flat out ask a question. When is it okay not to be okay? We talked a little bit about layoffs. We talked about HR adversities. We talked about so many cases. So when is it okay not to be okay?
So if I could jump in on this one,
Please.
I would say this is where it's very individual, because you have to, this is where self-awareness comes in and the ability to say, I'm not okay. I need a break. I need a pause. And to have an environment where you have that safe space every day, 365 days a year. No one is happy and engaged and ready to go all 365. I think it's also how some moments, some days you're not okay, but you still have things to do and deliver. So I'm a parent, and every day is not, let me just be very transparent. Every day is not a good parenting day for anyone that has kids. Every day is not flawless in that space, but there are obligations and things that I have to do. And I actually talk to, and I'll use this in the analogy, I speak to my kids, look, mommy is having a rough day. So, and I'm a big cook. I'm not cooking tonight. This is not a good moment for me. And I cannot deliver the things that I normally do because I need a break. I need a pause. And I think it's being able to articulate where you are, but creating, this is dual fold, having an environment where you can say, today is not a good day. I need a break. I need that space. Let me regroup tomorrow, but I need today. And I think that's important, especially in HR, because in HR, this is not one of those jobs where people are always thanking you or happy to see you, especially those I know, we all know the layoff circle. This is not one where usually it's a thankless job many times. And having that space usually comes from your HR peers or your senior leader to say, I need this moment because I too am impacted by the work that I'm doing. So I think at any point in time, you have the right to say it. It's important that you communicate it. And oftentimes I see that people don't necessarily communicate that they're not okay. They just pretend. And then the work falls, the performance, all these other discussions happen. And we have no idea that that was just an off day for you. So I would say that that would be my recommendation on that piece.
I say 100%. I agree with you, Jaylee. I think it is. I think at any point in time, it should be okay to not be okay. And Manolo, you don't sound like a duck. I'm in the same boat as you with the cold. So I empathize. It's okay to not be okay. I also think, to John's point, because he's been talking about this a lot, we have to train leaders to allow that space. I have two different examples in my career that were very opposite. After I had my first son, I went back from maternity leave and I traveled with my group. My group I was training to France without my son. I gave a presentation. And as soon as I said, I'm a mom and a parent, I think it's the first time I said it publicly, I started crying. And I was mortified because I was crying. So I cried worse. And one of the leaders in the group said, it's okay, Michelle. Now we know you have a heart, right? And I started laughing, and it was okay. It just gave me permission to not be okay. And then fast forward many years later, I had a CMO in a meeting with me, and she started crying. And the leaders are the right thing in the moment, but then came in my office afterwards and said, she's not going to make it. She can't cut it. She can't take the heat. We have to let her go. And so I think it's those moments where leaders have to say, leaders have to understand it's okay to have a bad moment and build that into your culture.
I'm gonna sort of straddle what both of you said, though. If I go back to some of the earlier comments, Jolly, that you made around what do you bring to work, and then Michelle, your point of being human. I think it depends on what your role is. If you're the CEO, or if you're the HR manager, or if you're an individual contributor, there's different moments which you need to play the role you have. If I take the topic of layoffs, which is in the press right now everywhere. If I'm the CEO and I've had to make a business decision to do layoffs, I'm probably not happy about it. I wish I were hiring. I wish I were growing. I wish we were doing more. And in the messaging, sharing that you're human and that you are not ecstatic about the situation that you're in shows that you're human, and there's some kindness and some vulnerability and some awareness. That doesn't mean that CEO gets to be the person who loses it in front of the entire organization. So there's a time and a place for that person. There's a time and a place for the HR manager and each leader to play the role that they have. So I guess to me, your question, Manolo, of where is it okay? It depends on who you are. And everyone needs someone with whom they can have kindness and grace to be able to be absolutely their most authentic and vulnerable self. It may not be in every moment that you want it to be in, depending on the role that you play in the organization. So I think everyone gets to have it. It just might not be at the moment that you want to have it at. Please jump in.
I could follow back up with Carrie's point right quick, because I think this is such a strong point, and especially when we talk about how do you build the resilience and that toughness. And oftentimes it is, especially in the role, and that's why I carved out for HR, you still have to do it. You still have to push through. And opting out, I always say life is hard and you do the hard things. And there are times where you cannot opt out and you still have to do the hard things, even though it's a bad day, even though you don't want to do it and you don't want to feel it. And I think there is a gap in understanding of exactly what you're saying, Carrie. What role has that option and what role does not? I can tell you in the role that I sit in, it's usually not an option.
Yeah.
right? I have to do the layoffs. You have to do the things. Every day is not a great day, but I still have to show up and keep people energized, even on my bad days.
Yeah. As the CEO, you are the parent in the description you gave earlier. You still have the responsibility to the organization to play that role the best that you can at that moment.
Yes. I love that, right? Because the role does matter. I would say also, though, the resource matters as well. And I mean, sometimes it's difficult to not be okay, because there may be components of privilege that factor into this as well. And I love Jaylee's example about, mom's not having a good day. Right. And so you think I'm cooking a 4-course meal tonight, y'all get ready for the pizza, right? Like that is very real. But I would also say in some contexts that comes with a level of privilege to be able to have a plan B for not being okay. And ordering the pizza, right? To use the simple example, that may not be, from a resource standpoint, an option for some of those for whom we support and work with. And so being thoughtful of not only when is it okay, but to not be okay, but how is it okay for me not to be okay? That's a question, I think, for some of those on our teams that they struggle with maybe even more. They know they're on the verge of not being okay. They just don't know how and how things will get handled as a result of them not being okay, because they don't understand what resources might be available.
Thank you so much for talking about this, because this is what creates the emotional and the mental strength, is this having the conversation and shining a light on the stuff that makes it really difficult. And, when you ask the question, like, when is it okay to not be okay? My first reaction was when you're not okay. Like, there's the acknowledgement of I'm not okay. And then and now what? Now what? What do I have to still do anyway? What can I let go of? Like we talked about before. What is my role? And what are the resources that are available to me? And all of that is really hard to do and think about and process when you're not okay. So the way you are able to actually execute on that is really important. And I found that a lot of times it takes, and this comes from the HR role, and then also leaders and peers, the awareness of someone else who is floundering and can't figure it out, to be able to say, hey, I noticed this. How can I help? What do you need? Not what's going on, tell me all about it. But, what do you need right now? How can I help you? You have permission to take a step back for a minute. Even the CEO who has to do the layoffs. Okay, I'm not okay. What do I do now? How do I support myself? How do I make it possible to still do what I need to do, even though I'm not okay? It's not about me. I have to be empathetic. I have to show up with kindness. What do I need to surround myself with to be able to deliver that effectively? And all of that, what comes first, the organization, the individual, the training, the resources, like it all matters. And, it takes these conversations to be able to surface that and figure out which pieces you need to focus in on.
Yeah, exactly. And Sarah, I think that's the definition of resilience. We've said a few times, resilience is being tough. I don't think it's being tough. I think it's being able to take that step back and say, okay, I'm not okay. How do I move forward? We call it stop, drop, and roll in the resilience training that we do, where you kind of take a moment to say, I get it. Like, I'm feeling really stressed. Why am I feeling this way? Reground yourself and say, how am I going to move forward? And it's not getting over it. It's moving forward, understanding that you're in a tough space.
So I'm going to follow up on something I dropped in the chat for everyone. It's an article that Jill Moffatt, who's an Olympian going to Paris this year, and she went to Tokyo, wrote recently and shared on LinkedIn on anxiety and depression, and specifically on anxiety attacks. And she realized that she was having them. And she's written an article about her experience and over the last 5 years, how that's grown. And at the start line of the Olympics, you don't get to say, this is a bad time. And and she gets the anxiety in places of difficulty. So she doesn't get anxiety on a random Tuesday when she's going to do her laundry. And so it's interesting. I think, you know, I was speaking to her about it last night because I know her, and I would say, I'm really proud of you to share how vulnerable and weak that can make you. And yet for her, it's made her feel really strong, because her ability to navigate through difficult moments and difficult situations and learn, have the awareness, manage through self, manage into difficult places to do hard things, relates very much to the kind of work and life scenarios we're talking about. And so when I think about sort of bringing all this together, there are places and times in your role that you have to do hard things at a time when you have to do them and you don't have the choice. And having the self-awareness to manage smartly through that. And, you know, she shares how she's reached out to teammates and to coaches and to others, which are the same as us at work, to leaders and to HR and to other resources that are available, to build that resilience, to prepare for those difficult moments so that you can show up and be your best self. So that's some context to that story. But I think it's what's interesting to me in this is A, self-awareness, B, vulnerability to say, I'm not great at this and this is really hard. You know, she's telling her competition that's the thing she's got. And that's not necessarily something we all want to make ourselves that awkward and weak. And yet for her, it's built a source of strength and pride to know that she can do things she never thought she could do before. And I think we all have that capability as well.
And I think there's that other piece, right? That there's the awareness of vulnerability, and then there's the experience, right? Like we can't train for experience. We can share our experience, but you have to go through hard things to know that you can go through hard things. And then that becomes a source of emotional strength that you can draw on to say, oh gosh, I've done this before. I've been here before. And when you hear that from an Olympian or you hear that from a really high performer, it gives you permission. Like, oh, if she can do that in my job, I can do that. I got this.
I said to her, once the Olympics is over, I know a lot of people who want to hear your story a whole lot more because it's really inspiring.
This is such an amazing conversation. And I always recognize great conversations when my role as a facilitator becomes irrelevant. So thank you so very much. I was just enjoying this. I will just add one of the best definitions of resilience that I heard from another of our Hacking HR friends, Debbie Plager. You probably saw her, you probably heard about her. And she said on one of the panels about 2 years ago that resilience is not about bouncing back, but it's about bouncing forward. And I so love that. It's on a Post-it note. I made it 2 years ago. It's in my home office, and I still go and look at it every single day. And you naturally brought this conversation to a point where I would love to create a space where you could share what gets you through those bad days.
I'll jump in. You're all getting very quiet. I actually shared this story with Jill yesterday after she shared that article. I raced for rowing. You can see a bicycle here, but I raced for rowing. And one, for me, physicality, doing things that are physically challenging is a great way to release, recharge, rebuild, etc. And as I was doing a race last year, someone asked me, do you get nervous? And it's the same when I think about when I used to present to large crowds for the first time. Do you get nervous? And what do you do with that nervousness? And somebody asked me, have you ever heard of butterflies flying in formation? I was like, no. And the theory is not that you have butterflies and that you're like, please, can they go away so I'm calm? But how do you get those butterflies to fly in formation? So for me, I build resilience by doing things that are hard, that are outside of the workspace. I also do things in the workspace that stretch me, so both really play off of each other and build that confidence. Sarah, to your point of doing things I didn't know I could do before. I remember the first time I presented to a really big crowd of a lot of senior executives 20 years ago, and somebody said, if you have fun, they'll have fun. And I have now shared that story with others who are doing it for the first time. And so I think, to me, how I build resilience is to test myself. I prepare so that when I get there, I know that I have the capacity to do it. Both professionally and personally, but that resilience gets built by adding another notch in my belt of something that I did. And I would also say I surround myself with people who I trust, who are kind, who give me grace, who give me coaching, who tell me what I could have done better in all of those scenarios where bringing my my best self. If my best self isn't good enough that day, they'll tell me how I could have been better. So to me, it's one, putting myself in a place where I can do more personally and professionally, but also then surrounding myself with people that I trust.
I would say it is, I agree on the physical. For me, it's strength training. I'm really big into strength, and it was a thing I didn't like. So I build resilience by actually trying things that I tell myself I don't like, and then I try them, and then I master them. And some of them I'm like, I still don't like this, but I did it, but I wouldn't do it again. And then others, yes. And then others, and I have for at least the past 4 to 5 years really leaned into the physical aspect, because I found myself, I was so wound up and tense just from the day-to-day life, the HR day-to-day life. Everyone experiences, if you're in it, you understand it. And I found really the strength training relieve the stress. There are a lot of different things that I do. Another one, as I mentioned, is I love to cook, because I learned in HR, I can influence, but oftentimes you don't own or control. Things are handed to you and you have to fix them and solve them, and you influence, but it's not yours. And I enjoy cooking because even if it turns out bad, I have created from start to finish, and I'm able to control kind of that outcome. And that allows me to do something in a creative space, because I'm not very creative. And I would say the other one on the building is reading about these kinds of conversations where you hear different people, different experiences, but reading about how people have really gone through a lot of challenges in life. So Carrie, the article that you're saying, knowing that other people are doing the hard things and they just push through. So how to keep going when you don't want to go, and reading story after story. I would say those are just some of the examples. I have more, but those are just a few of the examples of how I rebuild and recharge.
Shall we go, John, and then Michelle?
Thank you. Yes, it's funny that we're all talking about physicality. I'm in the gym early in the morning, because that's, if I don't do it early, I don't do it. So I need to be in there, right, to and make that commitment to it. I think one of the other things is really about groundedness. And so, Sarah, I think you had said a little bit ago about happiness, right? We can't guarantee that you'll be happy right at work or wherever you are each day. But I agree. But learning how to look beyond the emotion and get to a state of being. So in my own life, and actually one of the values at Humoriso is joy. That even in the hard stuff of HR, we can still be secure in a state of being, of definitionally knowing that we can operate in joy, even when we have to do layoffs and difficult things with people. Not that we're smiles in it. I'm a crier. It doesn't take very much for me. I will cry right along with you. But I can still know that I'm grounded in who I know I am to be, and operate in joy in the privilege of the work that I get to be involved with, because I know I can deliver even the difficult messages in a way that's compassionate and considerate of the audience I'm speaking to. So I can still operate in that way. And so I think that from a resilience standpoint, working with individuals, providing opportunity for individuals to understand where they're grounded and why, and help them to have their footing a bit more secure, that's been really helpful for me. And to be open to the fact that every individual has, again, as we've talked about, a different path to that. And so someone may start with the physicality to get there because it breaks down some things, but some people may need to start with a notebook and a pen and unload that way first. And that has to happen for them. So having, again, that doorway wide enough that people can see there's a path forward for them in developing that resilience and operating by an example as much as possible to those who are seeking.
I love that. I also use exercise. I run, and I tactically use a gratitude journal, especially on the tough days where I'm like, oh gosh, I had such a tough day. I think about what are the things that brought me joy and what are the things that I'm grateful for. And that always helps ground me. In addition to that, I also lean a lot on my friends and my network, and my colleagues, because HR can be a lonely place, especially for HR departments of one. And so having that, sometimes you feel like you're the only one dealing with this and like nobody else must be dealing with it, and it must be a challenge that only you are facing, and it's not true. You're not alone. And having those conversations brings you back to like, okay, other people have done it and they've made it through, similar to the article, seeing other people going through it. So I really rely on my other HR pros, my network too.
I just want to jump in on something Michelle said earlier too. I think around resilience is boundaries. Boundaries are a really key way for me to foster resilience, which I think we're carving out time, we're carving out things is another piece of that. But Sarah, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, you all answered it. I'm also a runner, but I'm the kind of runner that it believes that they can't run. And so I spend a lot of time before going out saying, can I even do this? How can I do this? Well, how will I do this? And then I do it and I feel fantastic and great. Then I have kind of two buckets of practice that I have. One is kind of my maintenance. How do I take care of myself every day and ritually so that I have the capacity to handle things as they come my way? And then the other is like acute situations like, oh no, you're in trouble. What do you do right now? And so a lot of the things that everyone has talked about so far are part of my regimen one way or the other. But exercise is key, of course. Meditating is really important for me, being quiet. I don't do it all the time, but I try really hard to make it part of my practice because in the stillness, I can find some clarity sometimes. I read a lot. And in those acute moments, I really try to pause and just say to myself, what do I need right now? And the answer will be different depending on what the circumstance is. You know, maybe I got to go outside and sit in the sun for a little bit. Maybe I have to curl up with underneath a blanket and, you know, just feel the weight of what's happening and let myself move through it. But just that, what do I need right now is a really helpful question to ask myself in those tough moments.
I think your point of ritual is really important, is figuring out what you need and how often you need it. You know, when I left the last role that I was in, I was really heartbroken. The circumstances under which I left it. And I made a point of every day doing something kind for myself, whether that was exercise or reading or a sound bath or time with friends, to fill up my cup, back to where we started this conversation of, you know, do I have enough fuel to make it through the day?
These are absolutely, absolutely wonderful. Sarah, I saw you unmuted. You want to
I
add
know,
something?
I'm so sorry. I just wanted to say I'm a parent of 4. I am also a coach, and I coach young people and young adults as they're going into careers. And I think that the point that we were talking about before, that we're not trained for this. We can train as parents. We can help as parents. And that those formative years are so critical. We can build this in and take care of our young people better so that and I'm seeing it with the younger generations in the workforce now, like they're so much better at saying what they need than I was. So I just wanted to mention that, like, this is a lifelong process, you know, and I think we're getting in earlier and earlier to try and, you know, positively impact things.
Just as a special thank you to all of you, I will share 2 of the things that I do, and I share them quite recently, but happy to put them out there again. I do have a folder. I actually learned this from a line manager of mine many years ago. I have a folder on my laptop. It's called Smiles for When You Need Them. And I have there good things that people said about my work, or about a conversation, or about an interaction, or, you know, bits of feedback and feed forward. And when I really feel like this day cannot feel any more infinite, then I'm just, oh, okay, I will take 2 minutes. And I go and go through that folder. And the other one, and I make it a point, this is the last slide of all my change decks for when I work with teams and leadership teams. And it is the face, quite a crazy looking face of a daisy. And I tell people, when you do change work, you are the face of something deeply unsettling, deeply uncomfortable, deeply disturbing, and people will come at you. So the text with a crazy looking daisy is someone called me pretty today. Actually, they said you're pretty annoying, but I only concentrate on the positive. So I encourage people, build your own safe space where you go back to and you call yourself pretty. So we are roughly about 3 minutes from wrapping up this panel, just to make sure that there's a bit of a break for the next panelists to come in, and for people in the audience rolling over to get a bit of extra water, coffee, tea. We're beverage agnostic here at Hacking HR. But what I would love to do is having a wrap up, almost punchline, very value dense round of answers. Just acknowledging the reality of many people in the audience who are an HR team of one. What would you add to everything that we discussed until now? Or what would you call out again and highlight that is particularly meaningful and helpful and supporting and validating for our team of one? And in the interest of time, what I will do, I will pass the mic around clockwise. So Michelle, go first. I will give you a few seconds just to thank everybody in the audience for being here. Please stay on the link. There's another amazing conversation coming up very soon in a few minutes. So HR function of one.
I would say quickly, you're not alone, that you don't have to do it alone. So utilize your network. People have talked about therapy. That's a great option as well, but you don't have to do it alone.
Thank you so much. John.
Find a mentor. Find someone that can mentor you and help you through in that space, especially if you're a team of one, because you don't have anyone to bounce things off of.
Carrie.
I was going to echo, find a friend, a therapist, mentor, etc. And I would just say, give yourself grace, be kind. Know that you might do all your day and then cry in the car on the way home. But know that you are doing your best, and give yourself some kindness and grace.
Thank you. John.
I would say, get up. Don't sit at your desk anymore. Get up. Get up. It'll make a difference.
Wonderful. Sarah.
I would say leverage this network. Hacking HR, there's so many people who are a team of one, and you can create your own team of ones. Meet up once in a while, share the heartache and the heart fills, and find some resilience in that.
Yeah. Michelle, Jolly, Carrie, John, and Sarah, you are absolutely wonderful. Thank you for being here, and thank you for showing up with your amazing energy and insights. It was a treat and it was a privilege. Thank you everybody in the audience for being here. Please stay on the link. You are in for an amazing treat in just about 3 minutes. Amazing speakers, amazing topic. We will be talking about balancing work-life priorities. And once again, Jessa, thank you for taking such great care of us. Enrique, thank you for making this conversation happen. And I will look forward to welcoming you soon. Thank you so much.
Hello, and to Hacking a January series. Today, we will be talking about how we can improve our well-being. And today, we have our valuable panelists with us to discuss the roadmap to balancing your life and work priorities. We have been talking a lot about this year. I have been at events, and we have been just like talking a lot about this. But today, we will be talking about it from different angles. I think I have a connection problem. Is that so? Okay, just a second. Let me see. Okay, I just got notified that I am freezing intermittently. Hopefully, it will be fine soon. In the meantime, okay, so I'm audible. There's a gap. Let's try it. In the meantime, if you can put in the chat where you're from, where you're joining from today, how's the weather, how you're feeling, so that we get a sense of our audience. And in the meantime, I hope I am not breaking up still. Okay. Yes, so where are you joining from? Let's see. This is the beauty of these Hacking HR series, because we have people from all around the globe and we have a perfect diversity usually. And let's see. Okay. Yes, so you can hear me. I just learned from our audience, Jacksonville, Florida, India. It should be really late by now. UK. Okay, it's almost like the evening. Kansas City, Missouri. Who else is just like watching us? Kelowna, you see. Paramus, New Jersey, on east coast of the United States, it's raining. Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, the north part of the world is getting lots of rain during this time of the year. Let's see if we have anyone from the southern hemisphere enjoying the sun and summer in their region. And I think now my connection is better, right? Okay. So I will be keeping an eye on the chat. So if you have questions as we are having a conversation, please do put them in the chat, because I'll be keeping an eye on and will be asking your questions while we are also having the discussion with our audience. And as I said, this topic today is really dear to our heart, because what comes first is always our well-being, but it's really hard sometimes to balance both sides. So let's see what our dear panelist is going to add to this topic. Jessica, can we have our panelists on the stage? Hello, hello, hello. How is everyone?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
Hi.
Good, good. We had some glitches at the beginning, so thank you for telling me so. I did not realize, but I think we're okay now. You know what? I think for the last couple of sessions, the panels have been dominated by our female panelists, and today our panel is again, we are like having the female power today. So Alex, thank you for bearing with us with so many women on the stage, and we will be getting support.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I shouldn't maybe say it by will. My preference is usually being surrounded by great women. So I appreciate being on this panel. And Tracy is also a friend of mine, and we have always wanted to do a panel together. So this is many wins for me for having this panel today.
Same.
Alex,
I'm so happy. That's why you saw the smiles. So
I think you win for best introductory comments, Alex. Good one. Excellent.
Thanks, Angela.
I was thinking the same thing, Angela.
Amazing. Such a powerful way to discuss our discussion. So let's do a quick round, and I'll be just like calling out your names in the order that I see on my screen. And if you can just briefly tell about yourself and introduce yourself to our audience. Alex, you're the first one on my screen.
Sure. So I am Alex Seiler. My background is as a chief people officer and also a startup advisor. I currently advise 3 people tech startups, and I also am a fractional chief people officer to one of them currently as well. I have this interesting accent because I'm half British, I'm half Swiss, and I was born and raised in Hong Kong, and I've been in the US for 20 years. So I appreciate all things diversity.
Wow.
I am known for being very authentic with my point of view. So I plan on doing the same thing today. And yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell. And this topic is very near and dear to my heart. As somebody who's recently come off a sabbatical and has really been focused on what it means to take care of yourself. And if you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of others. So really excited to be here, excited to share my thoughts, but also learn from these amazing other panelists as well.
It's great to have you as well. And you are a true diversity role model right now. Such diversity in the background and, as point of view. So I am sure that we will be enjoying your point of view on this topic. Angela, you're next on my screen.
Hello, everybody. And nice to be here from beautiful British Columbia. I'm on the traditional and unceded lands of the Coast Salish peoples. I'm an HR executive. I've worked in diverse industries like insurance, banking, oil and gas, hospitality, construction, engineering, and I have loved all of them. And I'm also the author of 2 books, including most recently, The Squiggly Line Career. And I'd like to say a shout out to Tori Burns, who's watching this. Nice to be here today.
It's great to have you as well. Evelyn, you're next.
Hello, I'm Evelyn. I'm currently the Senior HR Director for Jason Strategic Merchandising. And most consumers don't know that company because we service a lot of businesses, and most of our clients are retailers. So we're the items that you put in your grocery cart that you did not go to the grocery store for, but end up in there. That's us. We're Impulse Merchandising. I found out I'm their number 1 customer after working there. And I've been there a little over 7 years, going on my 7th year there, and really worked to build the department from scratch until where we are today. And we're in growth mode even more. So it's an exciting journey. This topic is near and dear to me because I'm a strong proponent of wellness and mental health, especially with my team. My team knows I'm big on that. I might be the one online at 9:00 at night, but I'm condemning them from doing that. So, telling them to get off and, focus on life and their health, simply because they're not productive and they're not their best selves if they're not focusing on these things. And my role as their leader is to prioritize that for them, even when they don't want to. So I truly am near and dear of this subject.
This is really great. And we will be talking about the leadership buy-in as well. So this is like how important it is to maintain that balance.
Yes.
Tracy, you're next.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tracy Spanenberg. I'm joining from Concord, New Hampshire. I'm Alex's friend, as you heard, but I'm also, and I'm thrilled to say this for the first time on a Hacking HR panel, I'm also a fractional chief people officer. So I recently left a nearly 30-year corporate career to do some fractional work, some advising, and more speaking. And this is also a topic, like most of us, or all of us here, near and dear to my heart.
Amazing, and yay to being fractionals. This, I think we will be hearing more about the fractional roles in the near future. And this is actually the new way of being in executive roles, I believe. So congratulations on that new path.
Thank
And Agustina.
Hi, everyone. Very glad to be here today. I have more than 20 years in the HR space, specifically in the tech industry. I worked at organizations such as Google and Red Hat. And most recently, I joined almost 2 years ago, Eventbrite, which is a marketplace for live events. We strive to be the indispensable marketplace for live experiences. So we serve both customers and creators, and we strive also for diversity. And I love this topic actually, and I just finalized an all hands that we did for all our HR team here at Eventbrite, where our Chief People Officer John Adcock started actually this first all hands of 2024, promoting folks, both leaders and everyone in HR, to make sure they take the necessary time off. So again, I kind of resonate more with that, and I'm here to share with you, hopefully, some insights on how to become better at managing our time and energy.
Amazing. It's great to have you here. So before we start the discussion, I would like to ask, who is working remotely or in a hybrid structure right now? Okay, so everyone, great. Because I would like to start the discussion with how that impacted our work and personal life balance, because there has been a significant shift after the pandemic where we were actually forced. So I have been working remotely for the last 12 years, but the pandemic made it something compulsory for us to shift into that. And how do you feel like that impacted the work and the personal life balance? Angela, let's start with you.
So I'm probably going to be an outlier in my opinion here. I've always loved the autonomy of being able to work when and where I want to. And one of the advantages that executives have that some more junior or frontline employees don't have is the autonomy to make our own schedule. So I've been very fortunate in my entire career, especially as an executive, that I could work where I needed to, when I needed to. So the autonomy has been very important. What happened when we switched to working from home, working remotely, initially because of the pandemic, and then in some cases because that's just how companies work, I found actually there was more of a bleeding into my personal life of my work life, because when I would go into the office at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, whenever my day was done, I would close my laptop, put it in my bag, drive home. I'd have that time to decompress. And then I'd be home and I'd be doing my own thing, whether it was working out or sports or my hobbies or whatever. When I started working from home, because I was working in my kitchen, my laptop was always there. And so I'd be like, I'll just check my email. I'll just do one more thing. And Evelyn mentioned in her introduction that she would be on at 9 p.m., although she'd discourage her team from doing it. But I would be doing the same thing. It'd be like, because it was just there. There was nothing to delineate. So for me, actually, working from home impacted my personal life. Yes, I saved on the commute, but I found that I was working more hours and well into the evening. So I had a different experience than I think most people had, which is that they got to do more of their home life versus their work life when they started working from home.
So this is really interesting because I have been working with companies, helping them transition to remote work and like manage their responsibilities. And as you said, I mean, it depends on like how we are perceiving it and how we are practicing it. So sometimes it's just like, there's more leaning to work than life, or sometimes, as you said, depending on the phases of life or like the responsibilities with family, it might lean into more personal life. So Alex, how has your experience been with this?
For me, I think it's like life. Everything comes in waves, right? So I think it's changed over time. So I think for me, I don't think what Angela's saying, at least for me, is an outlier. She used the word autonomy. The two words I use a lot are flexibility and optionality. I like having the flexibility and the optionality to work where from where I want. I think the challenge is when companies force you to work a certain location. And I don't like that because, again, it goes back to wanting to have that choice and optionality. I think for me personally, I get bored just being in one location. So I also like to mix up where I am. So sometimes I'll go to a WeWork once a week just to be around people. And I think that's the other thing that's happened, not because I need to know them, but I do miss in real time interactions or seeing people. So, and that wasn't necessarily the case at the beginning, right? But I do think there's a certain amount of professional isolationism that exists today if you're constantly just working from your home, living from your home, whatever. And listen, I'm in my home right now. I love it, but we all need to mix it up and have something different. So I think it's morphed and evolved over time for me.
This is really interesting now that you're also talking about location, because it's not only about like where we are working from, but it's about more like as you said, about the flexibility. And when we had the summit for the World Happiness Foundation, it was found out that the number one factor that impacted people's happiness was flexibility, having that autonomy. So this is like really supporting that, what you said, what Angela said. So it is like, it's really an important component in the well-being of people. Evelyn, what would you add to that?
Story of my life on mute. I would also echo their sentiments and add that finding that balance was an ebb and flow, as much like what Alex said. I think initially everyone just wanted to be home, away from all the fray, but then you also go through feelings of wanting to be like, oh wow, I missed the water cooler moments, just talking with people and having those good moments. But then you also balance, well, I don't miss the commute, that hour to get there, the hour to get back, I'm saving that time. But then you have to balance, when do you turn off? And that for me was my biggest balance and challenge with remote. And so for as much as I loved it, that was my sore point in finding how to balance that. And even not just with myself, with also, being a leader with my team and then the company overall. And one of the things that have helped us, or helped me, should I say, as I was drafting policies for Canada, the right to disconnect, and just implementing that and, encouraging and embodying that within myself, even though in the US we don't have that, but just, taking those pieces and saying, wow, here it is. They're giving us a blueprint. Now, how can I take that and, use that for myself and others? And I've really been consistent with that and enforcing boundaries of, hey, when I'm out, I don't answer my phone. And, and people say, oh yeah, I was calling you last night. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm in now. How can I help you? Trying to redirect the conversation where before I probably would have answered, hey, I'm here, and that reinforced to them that I'm always available. By me stopping that, it enforced that I'm not available, and here are the hours that I am. So I think enforcing boundaries was a critical piece and embracing the remote work life. So if I had to add anything, I think that would be the one add into everything else that Angela and Alex and the rest of the team said.
Okay, so you mentioned a very important point, the right to disconnect. And I think technology had a great role in making us accessible all the time, and just like, even having that expectation on people that we would be like, accessible all the time. So I think that's really an important factor that's affecting this, managing those lines between the personal life and work life. So Tracy, how would you see that, and from the perspective of technology and like being able to disconnect, how easy do you see that in your life, and how do you see it happening in the companies that you are working with?
Yeah, I think it's, can be impossible, right? It depends on the person. And to Evelyn's point, boundaries are critical. I learned boundaries far too late. And a couple things I wanted to say. Technology can be wonderful and it can be absolutely terrible. We're learning more and more about social media with kids and social media with adults. And so everything, I didn't grow up like this. I'm in my 50s and like, I didn't grow up with a phone in my hand. So, that's a little bit tricky for me, and I can disconnect some, but like I don't want to because I want to Google what's, anything I need, right? But I don't really believe in work-life balance. I don't use that phrase. I prefer more either work-life integration or just life, because work is a part of life, and work is also a thing, not a place. And I think one of the things when we talk about what happened over the past few years is we forget about the tens of millions of people who had to physically go in to a place every day. And I think, and I was running COVID response for a business with 50 physical in-person locations. And Alex's point to flexibility is key, because we can't always have remote work, but as companies, we can do flexibility, or we can do some measure of flexibility, or we can try to always. And what people want, not everybody wants to work remotely. It works well for me, but everybody wants some form of flexibility. And as companies or as fractional execs, or it's incumbent upon us to make sure that people feel seen and heard and valued, and that they have some measure of autonomy. And I think that that's really important. And technology can certainly be a tool to give that, and it can also be a tool to to really take over your life. And I think that's, again, where boundaries come in. And also, something I did with my team was modeling the behavior. If I had to be on late at night, I'd send an email, and they would see me having normal hours. They would see me doing things in the weekends. They would see me doing that. And that gave permission. I mean, they had the permission, but sometimes, if you see your boss or you see the leader of your department working 24/7, even though they may say, you don't have to, they're going to do that. So those are things that helped me over the past few years.
This is really interesting, because now I would like to ask, so Agostina, I will ask you this, but I would really like to touch on something that Tracy mentioned, like how you're scheduling the email. So should that be controlled by the sender or the receiver? I mean, who should be in charge of setting those boundaries? Is it the receiver who should be? And we have been talking about flexibility, and where does that flexibility start and end? Who should be in charge of setting the boundaries? Agostina.
I think that's a great question. And when it comes to technology, I think organizations have a grand role to play here. And what I mean by that is we have to set the right expectations as to how that tool is going to serve us. Let's give the example of Slack. I will give that as example specifically and not email, because in our organization, we're more dynamic. And that's, I would say, the tool that we mostly use and primarily use. So it can be either understood by the receiver. It's, by the way, Slack is an live on real-time chat tool. And again, if I get a message from someone, I can understand that there is a need for me to prompt a response right away, or I can get a message from someone and understand that since I have the possibility to respond asynchronously, I will do that. And so you see, there's that two different ways and optics to look at this. So that's what I consider the organization to be the supporter of creating guidelines for this, so that we can set the right expectations and equip our teams for success when it comes to using technology.
Mine, can I just add an extra point to that?
Sure.
So that just made me think is, I think that one of the things we need to sort of keep in mind, I think it goes broader than email. Just like when you think about diversity, equity, inclusion, it starts at the top, right? In this case, setting, and there's two words that both Evelyn and Agostina use that I find really important. Setting boundaries and expectations needs to happen starting from the interview process, whether you need to make it clear what your expectations are. And I'll give you an example. Somebody that was on my team previously made it clear that, hey, I pick up my daughter every day from 2:30 to 3, so I'm not going to be available for meetings then. Is that okay? And I'm like, absolutely, just block off your time. And as long as you're delivering on results, then it doesn't matter. And we need to move to more of a results-oriented workforce than one that is all about sort of set times of the day. Now, I recognize we're in the client service business, so you need to try and show up at similar times, but there needs to be, going back to our point, some flexibility about that, right? I also work out with a trainer every day, not every day, I wish, two times a week, right, at 7 to 8. And I've told prior CEOs I've worked with, that's my me time. That's when I'm getting set up for the day. So I also think it's on the individual to set those clear boundaries and expectations from the get-go. I think that's really important.
Exactly. That's how I feel as well. And now we have a comment from audience, which I think is supporting that too. Michelle is saying that when I started working from home, I felt like I had to work more to be seen.
Yeah.
So this is really like, and Angela, I was like going to.
I was actually going to bring that comment up. That I saw Michelle's comment too. And the thing about working in an office. So sorry, we're being a little presumptive that everyone here works in an office. I mean, some people might be frontline workers or factory workers, but we're just talking about when you're working in an office, nobody's sitting in front of their computer for 8 hours a day, just doing their work head down, right? You're getting up, you're chatting with your coworkers, you might be walking through the office, you go get a cup of coffee, and you're kind of seeing, but nobody's actually working 8 hours a day straight on their computer. But what happens when you're working from home, especially if you've got a manager who's really kind of a bit of a micromanager, is they look to see if your light has gone from green to yellow or green to red, right? And so if you're getting up and you're stretching or you're getting yourself a cup of coffee in your kitchen and your light goes from green, which is available, to yellow, suddenly it's like, where are you, Angela? What's going on? And to Michelle's point about she had to work more to be seen, I think part of it is people started paying attention to whether your light was green, not, as Alex put it, to your output. Are you getting done what you need to get done? Or are you looking to see whether somebody's light is green? I was talking to somebody a couple of weeks ago, and she was saying that she actually does a bunch of other stuff, but she taps her mouse with her elbow every 2 minutes just to make sure that it stays on green. Like, really? Is that what we're doing, people? I know we're getting a bit off topic, but we're going in the wrong direction here.
I would like to
but
add
I
to
think
that,
this is
Angela.
so much. Yeah, please do, because this is so much in line with what we are talking, because most of the reasons that are due, like, the when I'm talking with people who are experiencing either burnout or like, struggling with having those, borders between their personal life and work life, these are one of, really critical factors that are making them do those things, and that result in that burnout or like leaning towards more work life. Evelyn.
The one thing I'd like to add to that is, I think in alignment with setting boundaries and performance expectations, I think the other thing is missing is communication. I think clear communication of, what the expectation of you for that day or for that moment is, especially with office. Like I tell my team, a lot of times I don't care what you're doing. It's just a matter of if I need to answer questions, just knowing if you're available or not. And by doing so, here's how. Whether it's your teams, whether it's, sending me a message or email, just letting me know like, hey, Ev, I'm unavailable from, this time or that time, not a problem. Just so I know not to bother you during those time periods, but I think it comes from just a communication and building that trust amongst your team. I think a lot of the angst around remote in that, monitoring was no one knew what others were doing. Whether right, wrong, or indifferent, I think COVID really exasperated that fact that no one knew what others were doing. And so when you're in the office, it's easy to see that, but when you're away, it's kind of harder to see that. And so a lot of managers, because of that, didn't know how to manage without that micromanaged feeling. And I think part of our responsibility was developing and learning and training them on different tools of managing their employees, and how, to build trust. I think someone mentioned in the comments of building trust. And I think that was where a lot of development and training was needed for managers, and team building and trust building amongst themselves.
And I would just say, to Evelyn's point, this is kind of a combination of Evelyn and Tracy. Evelyn talking about the ad about communication is so key, and being very explicit in terms of that communication. And what Tracy said, earlier in terms of boundaries, like learning them too late. I did the same thing, and then you create you have to kind of reframe, rethink how you operate as well, and what you share and say to your teams. And I think particularly as many of us on this call as senior HR leaders, there's also an unsaid, unspoken rule that you're available whenever for conversations, even if that falls on the weekends. And that's something that I've learned to push back on. Like, yeah, if it's urgent, call me on the weekend. But if you just want my advice and counsel, that can wait till a Monday, right? So there's also learning and reframing some of those things and not letting people assume that it's okay, but communicate that out as well.
Exactly. When I'm working with companies, I help them create a communication urgency map. So to map everything, what would be regarded as something urgent and which tool to use in those cases. Because then because like I saw people just like, immediately sending out WhatsApp messages when something was not really urgent. And for me, like WhatsApp is more like personal. I mean, my mom is on WhatsApp, my son is on WhatsApp. So, I mean, if it's that urgent, if something is just like burning, okay, you can just like give it a call. And so it's really important to set those boundaries. And Tracy, by the way, going back to your like the original comment, someone is also Michelle is also talking about the leadership, and I would like to ask you about the leadership side of that too, because she's saying when a leader sends a message to an employee of hours, they are setting the expectation that the employee needs to be available at that time, which you actually mentioned that you were not doing in the previous round. So how would you see the leader's role into this matter?
I want to jump in a couple of things in this because Michelle's a good friend of mine. So we've known each other for years and years, and she was on the last panel. She's also, and I think this is a really important point, and she's amazing, and you should all connect with her, but she's an HR executive. She's an HR executive who was reporting to a CEO, and she felt that way. So how does the rest of the organization feel when their executives feel that way? That filters down, and that culture becomes really, really toxic, right? And so, I think that that's a really important point to make. And, yes, that when a leader sends a message off hours, and that's why I not only didn't do that myself, but I trained our executive team to not do that. Now, as an executive, as a chief people officer, my role was not 9 to 5. My role, I was compensated for putting in probably a lot more hours than I should have. But, that's what happens when you are an executive and you work in the executive team. But part of my role also was to ensure that my team had manageable schedules, had boundaries that were, that I was coaching them to make sure that they were, they were not burning out like I was. So that's, successful for some, not so much for others. But one of the things I did with the rest of my executive team was train them on what happens. You send a message, this may be important to you at 9 o'clock at night, and you may think, and you may say to whoever you're sending it to, you don't need to respond to this right away. They're going to. So if they happen to be on their email, they're going to. And then all of a sudden, that sets the expectation that I've got to check my email every night at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, whatever. And I've got to get back to that. No matter how many times you say no, you've got to walk the walk. You're doing that. So we had actually a lot of success with that. And I had to periodically remind people. But that's so important. Like everything, and I think Alex said this, it starts at the top.
And it becomes, to Tracy's point, it actually becomes a little bit more challenging when you have a team that works across time zones. So in my example, I worked out of primarily in the Pacific time zone, but I had team members in the Eastern time zone. So it's still working hours for me, and I'm sending out emails, and I'm thinking, gosh, they're going to get this at 8 o'clock their time. I don't want you to respond because it's still my working hours. And so I put, I and many of my team members on the bottom of my emails, it actually says my working hours may not align with your working hours. Please do not feel obligated to respond outside of your working hours. Like I'm trying to acknowledge that actually we have a time zone issue. And to Evelyn's point, she mentioned in her introduction about the right to disconnect legislation. So one of our provinces, Ontario, enacted this employee-friendly legislation where they have a right to disconnect after working hours, and you're actually not supposed to contact them. And that also helps to shape leader behavior, because you have to acknowledge that. And it would be more helpful if lots more jurisdictions had that kind of boundary setting. I mean, they force the boundary as opposed to requiring the leaders or the employees to do it themselves.
I agree
So,
wholeheartedly.
Yeah, and talking about global companies, because like now you are mentioning different time zones, but when we think about a global company, it's across like, maybe like 24 hours. We're talking about like several different time zones. Agustina, how is Eventbrite managing this? Do you have anything in place for managing that global time zones?
Oh, you just are in the sweet spot of the conversation, because let me tell you that last year we decided to tackle a global project oriented to how we work, or the future of work. And the objective of this was not necessarily to go out there and see what other tech companies are doing. Of course, benchmark is great, but we also wanted to understand what our employees specifically needed in this new context of work. So I was fortunate to be part of a squad of this project. We did this globally, following an agile methodology via human-centered design. And so I won't bore the audience with the different steps that this methodology follows, but the purpose is to bring our employees to the center and co-create solutions with us. So a quick answer to your question, mine, would be we definitely brought our employees to co-creating with us. We are experimenting actually different initiatives on that regard. Because we have expanded also internationally, and we are in different geographies, and expanding heavily in new locations such as India. So this is a topic dear and near to our hearts, and we are definitely going to continue on the exploration avenue this year.
And this is really interesting, because now you brought in the culture aspect of this. Because in some cultures, it's okay to overwork or to ask people to just, be flexible with their boundaries. But with some cultures, it's not okay. So how do we manage that? And how do we make sure that we have a culture in the company that embraces everyone and is just embracing the diversity part of it as well? Alex.
I had a feeling you were coming to me. So look, I think that, I've had the benefit of living and working in so many different cultures. So what I would say to this question is, and I think it's a really tricky one with a global company, is you have to find a way for people to understand the mission and the values of the company at a broad level, but you also have to respect local cultural nuances, right? Mm-hmm. You don't want to be in a position where you are telling people in China or Japan what you think they should be doing for their well-being, because it might look differently for them. You could say, hey, here are some things that we do globally, and see if they pick up on that. But again, I think this goes back to the danger of sort of forcing thinking around this topic, because it looks different to all of us as well. So that's something I would say. The one thing I would encourage, though, regardless of what people are doing, is, we're people leaders, and we're used to creating people strategies. And I always say a successful people strategy is one that has a continuum or an arc, right? And that goes for well-being and setting priorities like this. You've got to create an arc for yourself, right? Otherwise, it's going to fall off, and that comes down to discipline and routine. So and accountability. So I think those are the things that people, if there's a practical tip I can give to people in terms of a takeaway here, it's that. But I think, again, like any matrix global organization, provide the global viewpoint, but respect the local cultural nuances.
This is really important. And I mean, like with many of the aspects, I think should be respecting this, because like usually what we do is we're just like thinking that everyone is thinking the same way, or just like if it's okay for everyone. But just having that local essence and maybe having that contribution from the local people is really key to maintaining that culture that embraces everyone and everyone is feeling welcomed in that culture. Evelyn, did you want to add something to that?
I think Alex was spot on in everything he said. The only add I would say is even just globally, but also locally, the differences. Just using ourselves. I know from going from a US and then going into Canada was a complete culture shock because of differences and nuances, right? And so you have your US that's like, hey, this is what it is. And you have kind of like, wait a minute, no, that is not what it is. You know, and then you have to be respectful because you have to hear them, right? You have to listen to them and understand why they have hesitations or why this. And I think Alex hit on great with a point where, you know, you tell them like, hey, this is what our global plan has been. You know, how does this vary in your culture? You know, how does this vary in your region? You know, what nuances do we need to put in place to, you know, make this synergize here? And then you will find that it may not even be a lot of nuances or it just, but you want to make sure you hear their processes in place so that you can make the effective changes for them. And I think, you know, even in the US, we have a lot of nuances that we don't always, you know, take into account. I'm from Philadelphia and, you know, we're very direct, very straight to the point. A lot of people say we're not friendly, but we're very kind. Like we'll do anything, but it may not come off in the approach that you like. Where you go, when I lived in the South, lived down in Atlanta, you know, they're talking to you about their pets and, you know, just so friendly and nice. You know, my northern is like, whoa, this is too much. And they're looking at me like, you know, why are you not so nice? Right. And so here I had to learn a different culture. Oh, and here in the same, you know, just a few hours away from each other. So, you know, I think you learn the biggest piece of this is the learning and the listening. So that way you can be effective and make the proper changes so that everyone can feel seen. And I think that's the biggest piece of inclusion and belonging, right? Feeling heard, seen, and feeling like that they've been incorporated into the overall mix of where the next steps and strategies are.
Exactly. So Angela, I will come to you. But just, I would like to wrap up everything that we have been discussing and would like to ask you one thing. So we said setting boundaries is important, being flexible is important, being an outcome-based company is important to avoid micromanaging so that people are not just overworking, and the right to disconnect, to give people the right to disconnect and be a role model as a leader is going to help this. And Angela, so I would like to ask you, and you can just like, you know, add your comments that you also had from the previous questions as well. How do we assess this? How do we, like, even before taking any of these actions to maintain a culture of having the right to disconnect or having the flexibility, how do we measure that how people are doing it, or are they just like, you know, having that in their life or not? How do we see and make our action plan based on those measurements?
So first of all, I agree with something that Tracy said very early on in her comments, which is something I say all the time. I never say work-life balance. I always say work-home balance, because work is a very important part of a meaningful life. And so I feel very strongly about that. And how to delineate. So it's very difficult when we talk about balance. Sometimes people think 50-50, right? I'm going to work for 8 hours. I'm going to have fun for 8 hours. It doesn't always work that way, because there are things that interfere. Maybe you're closing on an acquisition. Maybe you've got an emergency situation. Maybe you have a child that's homesick. Maybe there's a pandemic going on. And so I'd like to think of balance more in terms of a week or a month versus day to day. I don't look at my day and say it was my day balance. I say it was my week balance, it was my month balance. And some of the things that I do, for example, is, I know I'm very old school. I keep a paper day timer, and I color code all of my appointments, and all of the fun stuff is yellow. And I look by my week and I say, oh, you know what? There's nothing yellow coming up in my calendar. So I make sure that there's something yellow in there. And so sometimes you have to have a physical reminder. Another way, though, building on what Evelyn and both Evelyn and Alex said, is it's really important to understand the nuances of the culture that you're in the moment. So, for example, I worked in a multinational company, 80,000 employees in 80 countries, but it was headquartered in France and different time zones. So the folks at head office worked from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. their time every day. But then you could not get hold of them at all in the month of August, at all. So you knew this. You knew that their balance was 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. every day, Monday to Friday, with the exception of their 2-hour lunch. And then don't bother even reaching out to them in August. So you worked around it. You had to understand the nuances of that culture. And the CHRO at the time, who went on to become the CEO of the company, we were in a meeting and we were talking about balance. And he said, first thing I do is every January, I schedule my vacation for the year. So I plot into my calendar when I'm taking vacation, not just August, because he was in France, so he took August off. He said, but March break or, whatever was going on. He says, it's in my calendar and it's blocked. And people worked around that. Now you could say, well, he was the CHRO. And so he had the flexibility to do that. But to Alex's point earlier, when you're setting boundaries, when you're saying, I have to pick up my child between 2:30 and 3 every day, or 7 and 8 in the morning, twice a week is my me time, you're blocking that calendar and you're setting those boundaries, respecting what the culture is around the area that you work in. I think that's a very important strategy to take.
And I think you're doing it for yourself as well. Like setting those boundaries to yourself as well, so that you are not overstretching yourself. So I think that's really a good point. And so, Justina, I will come to you because you mentioned also about that project that you were doing. And so how did you co-create that? Like how was the experience? So if anyone who is watching us is like at the beginning of putting in a strategy or like a project for improving that boundaries, setting the boundaries or flexibility, everything that we have been talking about, how can they initiate it first? By listening. And we were also discussing about the importance of listening to people. How can they initiate it? By listening to people.
Yeah, so what we did was basically get together a group of leaders and individuals from all areas in the organization. It was around 40 people that participated. And basically what we did was having different themes that we wanted to explore. Being one of them, the challenges about working, we're a remote first organization, so working remotely and how do we make async work, but on the other hand, how we make sure that our people stay connected to each other and to their teams and organizations. So one of the things that, and this is to a point I want to make about when we start with this grand projects, we always want to or think that we will come up with the brightest and more innovative idea, right? Because that's part of the co-creation. However, sometimes it's the listening aspect that we've been all talking about here, and being very intentional about understanding where those pain points are that can lead you to the best solution. And in our case, definitely being, again, remote and having distributed teams and new geos where we were expanding, there were some challenges that as we went out there and listened to different groups, appeared to be the time zone difference, and particularly attending to the important business meetings, to those all hands, to those meetings where leaders were discussing the critical updates, and we used to do those every synchronously. So we did them live, and we discovered by doing this again, exploration with the teams and hearing what their needs were, that it was as simple as offering the possibility of doing that on demand, having those recorded was a great opportunity to, again, equalize for everyone, making sure that everyone felt included without losing the possibility, because we wanted this to be a two-way conversation, or for people also to engage. We also wanted them to participate, and questions where we made the possibility to questions to be sent in advance, right? So as not to lose that aspect. And this is just one example of one of the other initiatives that we uncovered while working and listening to our employees.
This is really great. And this is like, also giving us ways to like how we were talking about how to embrace everyone, how to create that diversity and have everyone's voice heard. I think that's also impacting the overall well-being of the people. By the way, Angela, I loved your way of how you manage and have a personal view of your week. So I would like to ask everyone else if you have some, hacks about how to balance your. And I love the way how you said work and home balance, which I think this is like what we are talking about. Do you have any hacks like that makes you balance?
I would agree with Angela. I use my Outlook calendar similar to how she uses her planner, and that it's color coded as well. It's funny, my personal ones are yellow as well, so I see a lot of yellow on my screen. But I also found that doing that helped me to allocate my time much more effectively. I think remote work taught me sometimes I had a lot of dead time that I didn't realize. And so allocation of that time using my calendar in that way has been a big game changer for myself and even my team, because it puts a time to a task or to a thing. And it may not always work. Like you may allocate 30 minutes and you might need a little more, and that's fine. But at least you know that you spent that time doing that, and that you can look back and say, okay, I did do something. I did that, I worked on this or worked on that. And then it also helps to minimize random meetings, just add it to your calendar, just to calendar filler, right? You see time open. It's like, oh, no, she's not available. She has, but that prompts conversations too. If there's a need for something that I'm not available for, hey, do you have, can you switch some time around? Let me check, let me see. That gives me the flexibility to say yes, or no, I don't, let's schedule some time around this. So I think the biggest thing for me was being able to allocate that time appropriately, in addition to the color codes and seeing where the time was going.
Amazing. Tracy, do you have any hacks?
I don't think there's any shortcut to well-being, but I think what you can do, and I learned from my friend Melissa Doman, who's an author of Mental Health at Work, and she talks about this a lot. Like, she's like, we're all responsible for our own mental health. We're all responsible for our own mental well-being, our own well-being in general, right? So if we don't put ourselves first, and because of the work we do, we're naturally in a position to not put ourselves first. But if we don't put ourselves first, everyone suffers. And I've forgotten that at times. And during the pandemic, for me, it was running every morning on the treadmill. Then I fell out of like with running and fell in love with, cookies and brownies. So that's something. So now, but I still, for me, for my overall health and well-being, I exercise, and whether it's a Peloton or something, every single day. So for me, that's a kind of a touch point. During the pandemic, it was also writing on LinkedIn. That was kind of a touch point for me. And then when life was just on fire, it was also dinner with my family when everybody was home. Nobody would bother me during that hour or whatever it was. I wouldn't answer the phone. I wouldn't do anything. I would before, I would after. But those hard boundaries, and then as now I can put more and more boundaries. I tried to go to a coffee shop and do a call today, and, things like that, and things that bring me joy. Coffee brings me joy. So spreading that throughout the day, that's really important, and fiercely protecting whatever makes you happy and whatever makes you healthy, and doing that first before your work, before your kids, if you have them, before your pets, before your parents, before everything else.
This is really great. I mean, I love this. Putting joy first, putting what makes you happy, what makes you healthy before everything else. I think this is like a moment of bliss. That would be what I would just like name it. Alex, do you have any hacks?
I think I mentioned one or two, but I would also say I think it's a combination of different things. I live by my Google Calendar and my Calendly these days, but I also try to flex it if I'm sort of overdoing it, right? again, this is learning about boundaries. If I think I've scheduled too many things, I'm going to move stuff around and feel unapologetic about it as well. I think I mentioned before, I have the beauty of living in Los Angeles, so the weather is always generally good. So hiking and working out is really important to me. Those are two things that I really don't forego. And then I don't, props to Angela and Evelyn, because I want to be that color coder. It is not me, though. I just have to recognize who I am, and it's not that. But what I do is I always say to people, like, try to put something on your calendar, even if it's a month or two in advance, that will bring you joy, that you can get excited about, whether it's a trip, whether it's hosting a dinner party, whatever it may be, because that's something to look forward to as well. So that's something that I try to do as well. And then my new thing that hasn't worked right now, but we'll see, it's my attempt in 2024, is I have a board in my work office, which has different colored Post-its. And the idea is to have a to be started, in progress, and finished type of setup, so that I can also understand what's on the docket, and I've not attacked, and remind myself I need to do, but also celebrate the small victories. And I'm a big celebrate the small victories, because if you try to wait for the big one, you might be burnt out and exhausted and be knocked down by the time you get there. So those are some of mine.
Amazing. I have so many things now on my list of the tips to share. Now, Augustina, do you have any of those small hacks?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I share some of those with Evelyn. I definitely have some blocks of time to ensure they have focused time to think on those priority work that I need to be finalized. Also, I resonate with Alex to having time to exercise, be outdoors, with fresh air and oxygen, which is great. And I would also say that I'm an avid learner. And one of the things I'm reading is specifically about productivity. And I love this book, Undistractable by Nir Eyal, which I'm reading at the moment. And it prompts us also to unthink or unlearn some habits about productivity. And for example, there's one that I love, which states that to-do lists, which at one moment in time used to be very popular and everyone was with their own to-do list, are actually not that effective. And the reason is because we tend to go, as human beings, our brains, because it's based in neuroscience, will definitely go to those things that are easier first in our to-do list. So by the end of the day, we'll probably feel a little bit frustrated didn't end up doing those things that are priorities for us. And so the book prompts us to, with other ideas and tactics of some other productive methods that are more effective for us. One of them being assigning blocks of time where we can ensure that priority is entered in there, right? That based on the 80-20 rule, right? You must ensure that you have time for that 20% of efforts that will bring you the 80% results. So some of the things that I'm reading and learning at the moment, definitely book is must.
Okay, so you now reminded me of the eat the frog technique, where you are just like, I'm not sure if anyone has heard of it, but eat the frog technique is absolutely focusing on that, just like prioritizing and making the most important things done and at the beginning of the day, so that you are not procrastinating. Because if you don't do that, you will be procrastinating, and because you're not doing them is not helping you, because it's here, so it's going to disturb you all throughout your day. So I have been noting what you have been sharing, and I think, setting boundaries, being flexible, and this is for the companies to let their employees be more flexible, and setting a culture of outcome-based performance management, surveillance, and right to disconnect, and also giving ourselves the right to disconnect, putting ourselves first, and also having some joy in our life, what makes us happy, what makes us healthy, to have it just before everything else, to make it something as a priority. And as Alex said, to also schedule that on our calendar so that we have things that we enjoy. and also small victories, doing the important things, prioritizing them. Do you have anything to add? I mean, we have been just like talking about all those tips, and our audience, I hope that you are walking away with those little hacks and tips about how to maintain that boundaries between the two lives, so the work and home. So anything else you want to add?
The only thing I would add is if you are struggling to think of what that hack is for you, ask people around you or people that have found things successful. I mean, I'll be honest, part of the reason I love to work out, but I felt like I was comfortable making it a priority was that a CEO of one of the companies I was at made that a priority. He specifically told his assistant, my workout time is 7 to 8 every morning, so you cannot schedule a meeting at that time. And when he traveled, he even said, I need a hotel with a gym in it. So if leaders around you are doing it, then you should feel comfortable doing it as well. So, but if you're lost, seek people out, and it might not be the right thing for you, but the more ideas you get, you might land on that right thing for you as well.
Yeah. So as a leader, be a role model for people to follow you. Amazing. Thank you, everyone. It was really, I did not even feel like that it's been an hour. Now we're at the top of the hour, and it was really a fruitful conversation. Thank you for all the insight and your know-how about this. And thank you for the audience who has been watching us now live or even later on LinkedIn. And we will be seeing you in the next series, because we have some more of these events. And please keep an eye on the next month's series, as well, as we are going to be doing this, continuing to doing this every beginning of the month. So take care, and please keep your boundaries with home and work, and have some joy in your life. Bye.